In the sleepy little town of Harmony Creek, every day was the same. The sun rose, the school bell rang, and those big, bright yellow school buses rolled through our streets like clockwork. They were symbols of safety, predictability, and the dull routine of American suburbia. Everyone knew them and everyone trusted them, except of course for bus number 47. I'm Alex, and like any sensible teenager, I thought the stories about bus 47 were ridiculous. They were the kind of spooky gossip you'd share around a bonfire, just local legend. Some said it was cursed, a place where children died in a wreck decades ago, their souls trapped, forever waiting for new passengers. Others claimed that anyone who mistakenly boarded it after sundown simply vanished, never to step off again. Hilarious, I thought, rolling my eyes as I listened to my friends whisper the tales in the cafeteria. It was just an old bus, probably retired years ago. But on a Tuesday afternoon that should have been utterly forgettable, the ordinary shattered. School had just let out, and I was taking the shortcut through the faculty parking lot, trying to avoid the usual traffic jam. The lot was mostly empty now, the last few teachers' cars slowly pulling away. That's when I saw it. Tucked away in the far corner, beside the chain-link fence, sat a bus I'd never seen before. It was older, its yellow paint faded and streaked with dirt, its windows filmed over with dust. And there, peeling slightly but unmistakably, was the number 47. A cold prickle went down my spine, but it wasn't fear, it was pure, unfiltered curiosity. So it does exist, I thought. It looked ancient, definitely out of service, a relic the district had probably forgotten to scrap. It was parked at an unnatural angle, facing the empty woods behind the school, almost as if it had simply been abandoned mid-turn. I checked my phone. 3:45 p.m. Plenty of time before my parents got home. The temptation was too strong. I had to see if the legendary Bus 47 really was just a rusty hulk. I walked slowly towards it, my footsteps crunching on the loose gravel. As I got closer, the air seemed to grow still and noticeably cooler. The front door was slightly ajar, rattling almost imperceptibly in the non-existent breeze. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding weak in the vast empty lot. Silence. Holding my breath, I reached up and pushed the door open the rest of the way. The metal shuddered, scraping against the frame. A wave of musty, stale air like old velvet and decay hit me. I stepped onto the first rubber tread and then onto the floor of the bus. It was utterly, profoundly empty. The vinyl seats were cracked and the windows were grimy, letting in weak, diffused light. There was nothing supernatural about it, just a forgotten bus. I gave a skeptical laugh, pulling out my phone to take a quick picture to text my friends. "Look, the big scary ghost bus," I'd type. But as I raised the phone, my gaze caught the rearview mirror above the driver's seat. For a split second, I didn't see my own reflection. I saw a faint, swirling shadow in the third seat back. My heart hammered. I lowered the phone, blinking. The shadow was gone, and my own pale face stared back at me. Just the light. I tried to rationalize. Just the dust and the angle. Yet the silence of the bus was no longer comforting. It felt pressurized, heavy, like the entire space was waiting. Then I heard it, a sound so soft I almost missed it. It was a giggle, high-pitched, cold, and definitely coming from one of the rows behind me. I spun around, my blood turning to ice. The seats were all vacant. The bus was still completely, eerily empty. What was that? Was it just the wind outside? But the door was closed now. I needed to leave. I had seen enough. I turned quickly towards the exit, but the door that had been ajar moments ago was now latched shut. And then, without warning, I felt a deep, low-vibration rumble beneath my feet. The engine hadn't started. The keys weren't even in the ignition. But bus number 47 was moving. The low vibration I felt was now a grinding roar, and I was thrown backward as the bus lurched into motion. I scrambled to my feet and slammed my shoulder against the front door, rattling the emergency latch. It wouldn't budge. It was secured from the outside, or by something far worse. "Stop the bus!" I yelled, running to the driver's seat. The wheel was spinning freely, turning itself with swift, jerky movements. There were no keys in the ignition, and the emergency brake handle was vibrating so violently I couldn't get a grip on it. The air brakes hissed and Bus 47 accelerated, roaring out of the parking lot. I looked out the front window in disbelief. We weren't turning onto Main Street or any familiar route. We blew right through a stop sign and onto the old access road that leads out of town. The school's lights, moments ago a comforting presence, were shrinking rapidly in the rearview mirror. Panic flared, but I forced myself to be methodical. Technology, Alex. Use technology. I pulled out my phone. The screen flashed, no service. I tried to dial 911 anyway, just in case. Nothing. No bars, no signal, just a dead square of plastic and metal. I opened the messaging app to text my location to anyone, my friends, my parents. But the message box wouldn't even load. The bus, it seemed, wasn't just old. It was a dead zone. Then, the horror started to become visual. I glanced over the seat backs. The dust-filmed windows and cracked vinyl were still there. But now, sitting in the middle of the third row, I saw a shadow. It wasn't just a trick of the light this time. It was a dense, dark smudge shaped perfectly like a small child, knees drawn up to its chest. It was absolutely still. "Who's there?" I stammered, backing away. The shadow didn't move, but a whisper, thin as paper, drifted forward from the seat behind it. It sounded like a little girl giggling, but with a chilling, hollow resonance, as if the sound had traveled through water. I gripped the metal rail of a seat. I was alone, trapped inside a moving nightmare. I felt a desperate need to know if the bus was being controlled by something I could see. I slammed my hand onto the emergency door release in the roof. Nothing happened. As the bus sped up, leaving the last streetlights behind and plunging us onto the dark, isolated highway, the number of shadows began to grow. First 2, then 4, then 6. They occupied various seats, hunched over or sitting ramrod straight. They weren't solid, but the emptiness around them felt heavier than any living body. I reached for my phone again, not to call, but to use the flashlight. I pointed the narrow beam directly at the third seat shadow. As the light hit it, the shadow didn't dissipate. It retracted, seeming to sink into the seat fabric, and the faint scent of wet earth filled the air. And then I saw the faces in the windows. I looked out the closest side window, expecting to see the blur of the passing trees. Instead, I saw my own reflection. But my features were pulled and stretched into a grotesque grin, the glass warping my face into a mask of pure terror. Just below my distorted reflection, pressed against the outside of the glass, were small, pale handprints. I quickly checked the window across the aisle. Another face was pressed there, not mine, but a faint, blurry image of a child's face, their eyes wide and staring. They weren't looking at me. They were looking forward, in the direction the bus was speeding. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The bus wasn't just driven by an unknown force, it was a trap built from the souls of dead children. They weren't getting off. They wanted me to join their ride, to swell their numbers on this eternal, ghostly journey. The bus gave a terrifying shudder, the engine screaming as it hit a maximum speed no ancient vehicle should reach. Through the back window, I could see nothing but endless black highway. I was far beyond Harmony Creek, far beyond help. The shadowy passengers in the seats were now humming a repetitive, discordant tune, and their cold, empty laughter was filling the air. I had to get off, and the only way was out. I looked desperately toward the back of the bus where the emergency exit hatch was located, and prayed I could somehow survive a jump at this speed. The chilling laughter of the unseen passengers was the fuel for my final desperate surge of adrenaline. The bus was hurtling down the dark highway at a terrifying, impossible speed. I knew if I stayed on, I was just another number in Bus 47's eternal roll call. I scrambled past the rows of seats. As I pushed past the third row, a wave of intense, bone-aching cold washed over me, and I felt a brief, icy pressure on my arm. The weight of a hand, or perhaps a dozen hands. I cried out, stumbling, and noticed that the faded vinyl seat cover now bore a few dark, rust-colored stains that looked alarmingly like old, dried blood. Ignoring the paralyzing fear, I reached the rear of the bus. Above the emergency door was the red safety handle. I threw myself at it, fumbling with the latch. The metal was stiff and resistant, as if fighting back. I could feel the invisible eyes of the children watching me, their giggles escalating into a frantic, high-pitched chorus. They didn't want me to leave. With a final, desperate wrench, the latch snapped open. The emergency door wasn't just a door, it was a heavy hatch. I shoved it outward. A blast of wind and the deafening roar of the highway rushed in, nearly sucking the breath from my lungs. I didn't hesitate. I vaulted onto the rear bumper, holding onto the open door frame for dear life, the asphalt flashing beneath me at a dizzying pace. I took one last terrifying look back into the bus. In the diffuse light, the shadows seemed to solidify, their staring eyes, or the places where eyes should be, all focused on me. I pushed off. The world turned into a painful blur of gravel, dirt, and searing friction. I hit the shoulder of the highway, rolling violently several times before finally skidding to a painful stop in the tall weeds by the roadside. The impact stole my breath and left a raw, burning agony across my side and shoulder. When I finally managed to open my eyes, gasping, the first thing I saw was bus number 47. It hadn't stopped. It was continuing its terrifying flight, its brake lights non-existent, its yellow frame swallowed by the darkness of the highway ahead. It vanished as quickly and silently as a ship sailing over the horizon. I don't know how long I lay there, dazed and in shock. It felt like hours until the distant sound of a siren broke the silence. A passing motorist must have called 911. The police found me first, then the ambulance. I was covered in road rash and bruises, but alive. The local authorities were confused. They took my frantic, jumbled story about the runaway school bus seriously enough to investigate, but their investigation hit a wall immediately. They checked the GPS logs for every operational bus in the Harmony Creek School District. Bus 47, it had been decommissioned and sold for scrap over 10 years ago. The district had no record of a bus with that number being in the parking lot that afternoon. They pulled the CCTV footage from the school cameras. The tape showed me leaving the building, walking across the faculty lot, and then nothing. No bus. It simply looked like I had walked into an empty corner of the parking lot and vanished into thin air. The only anomaly was a brief, inexplicable flicker on the camera feed right where I said the bus was parked. There was no proof of the bus, no physical evidence of its movement, and no record of the accident I'd described. To them, I was a troubled teenager who had suffered a severe panic attack and run onto the highway. I was released from the hospital days later. I survived the encounter, but the ride left a scar deeper than any scrape on my knee. Now, whenever I hear the familiar rumble of a yellow bus, I freeze. I still live in Harmony Creek, but I refuse to ride the school bus. I walk the long way home every day, always looking over my shoulder. Because even now, safely in my own room, with the sunlight streaming through the window, I can feel it. It's the constant, undeniable sensation of being watched. I know the police can't prove it, and the cameras couldn't capture it. But I know they are still out there, rolling down the dark highway. And I know that the empty space behind me, the space where a shadow could sit, is never truly empty. The invisible eyes of Bus 47's passengers are still following me, waiting for the day I might accidentally step onto the wrong yellow bus again. In my town, the most reliable thing after the sun rising was Bus 11. It was a massive canary yellow beast that faithfully navigated the winding streets to Harmony High every morning. My name is Maya, and for 4 years, I'd been one of the many sleepy-eyed passengers who boarded it every day. The driver, Mr. Henderson, always followed the same procedure: roll call, a grumpy check of tardiness, and then the journey. Nobody was ever left behind. But there was one anomaly on Bus 11, the reserve seat. It was the second seat from the back on the driver's side. It wasn't broken or reserved for a specific kid with special needs. It was simply empty. Every morning, Mr. Henderson would glance at it and mutter, "Reserve seat, keep it clear," if any freshman dared to plop down there. We all just accepted it as one of the bus's strange, unspoken rules. I never questioned it until one particularly foggy Tuesday morning. The air outside was thick and gray, pressing damply against the windows. I was staring out at the hazy streetlights when my eyes drifted back inside, catching the bus interior in the reflection of the window glass. And in the reflection, the reserve seat wasn't empty. Sitting there, slouched against the window, was a small, indistinct figure. It looked like a young child, maybe 7 or 8, wearing clothes that seemed faded and oddly old-fashioned. I snapped my head around to look at the actual seat. It was, of course, vacant. Nothing but cracked vinyl and dust motes dancing in the weak overhead light. I blinked hard. Just the condensation, just a trick of the light. But for the rest of the ride, I couldn't shake the image. I kept my gaze fixed on the seat's reflection in the window across the aisle. Sometimes, for a fraction of a second, I would catch that figure again. Always sitting, always silent. The next day, the reflection was there immediately. It wasn't a shadow or a blur. It was clearly the figure of a child, and today I noticed where its head was turned. It wasn't looking out the window. It was looking at Sarah Jennings, a junior 2 seats in front of the reserve seat. The child's posture felt unnerving, intensely focused, like a predator studying its prey. That afternoon, Sarah wasn't on the bus. The next day, she wasn't in homeroom. By Thursday, the school intercom announced that Sarah had been taken out of school for an unspecified serious illness and might not return for the semester. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the bus's weak heater. I thought back to the reflection, to the gaze focused on Sarah. It was a terrifying coincidence, I told myself, but I had to be sure. On Friday, I watched the reflection again. The child was there, and this time, its unseen attention was fixed on Ethan Miller, a popular kid who sat directly behind the bus driver. I pulled out my phone quickly, my hands shaking, and aimed the camera at the empty seat. I didn't dare look directly. I hit the shutter button. The camera screen flashed, and when I looked at the picture, the seat was predictably blank. Just a blurry image of the back of Mr. Henderson's head. But then, Ethan coughed. It was a deep, wet, ragged sound that made the entire bus fall silent. He looked pale and clammy, his hands clutching a crumpled tissue. He wouldn't look up. I knew. That reserved seat wasn't reserved for a rule. It was reserved for the invisible passenger, and that passenger was selecting its next victim. The terrifying part was that no one else could see it, which meant no one else could stop it. And soon, Ethan Miller would disappear, leaving another vacant desk in the classroom. I looked at the reflection one last time. The small figure still hadn't moved, but I had the chilling, immediate realization that it was now staring directly at me. The moment I realized the invisible passenger was staring at me in the reflection, my heart dropped like a stone. The entire bus suddenly felt suffocatingly small, a moving coffin. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. Its intense, unseen gaze held me, and the fear was primal. Not of death, but of being chosen, of vanishing without a trace like the others. The next few days were a blur of paranoia. Ethan Miller didn't come to school on Monday. His spot behind Mr. Henderson was empty. The following day, the same announcement about an unspecified illness was made. That was 2 disappearances linked to that cursed seat, and now, I was the one being watched. I knew my frantic warnings wouldn't be taken seriously. How do you tell the principal that an invisible ghost child on the school bus is selecting kids for some form of eternal illness? I had to get proof. Something tangible that didn't rely on my terrified eyesight. The next morning on bus 11, I took the seat directly across the aisle from the reserve seat, ignoring the nervous glances of the few freshmen who noticed. As the bus pulled away, I pulled out my phone and switched the camera to video mode. I propped it on the windowsill, angling the lens directly at the vacant seat. I wanted a continuous recording, hoping that if the bus stopped, or if the light shifted just right, the reflection would be captured, or maybe even a shadow. For 20 minutes, the phone recorded nothing but an empty, dusty seat. Then, just as we turned onto Main Street, the bus stopped abruptly. Mr. Henderson didn't touch the brakes. The bus simply died with a jarring lurch. The doors hissed open, but there was no stop sign, no curb, and no one waiting to get on. I looked at the reserve seat's reflection. The child was there, and it was reaching its hand out, not toward me, but toward the open door. As quickly as it had opened, the door slammed shut, and the bus engine roared back to life, continuing on its route. When I played back the video later, my hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the phone. The recording showed the bus stopping violently, the door opening and then closing. But the interior of the bus was perfectly still, and the reserve seat was unmistakably empty. There was no faint figure, no reaching hand, no shadow. The camera saw nothing. The lack of evidence was more terrifying than any ghost could have been. It meant the entity was operating outside the rules of physics and light, rendering our modern tools useless. The pressure mounted when the target shifted again. Jason, a shy kid from the debate club who sat 2 rows behind me, suddenly started looking pale. I glanced at the reflection. The child was staring intently at Jason's back. I tried to warn him, but he just told me I sounded tired and needed a nap. He stopped coming to school 2 days later. By the end of the week, the atmosphere on Bus 11 was toxic. Seats were now conspicuously empty where familiar faces used to be. The remaining students were whispering, not about an illness, but about a curse. A strange, invisible force picking them off one by one. I knew I was next. Every morning, when I glanced at the reflection, the child was there, its dark, profound gaze fixed on me. It was waiting for the right moment. On Friday afternoon, Mr. Henderson finished the roll call. As the last student stepped off, he looked back at the few remaining passengers. "Maya," he said, his voice unusually soft, "you're the last one. Why don't you come and sit up front for the rest of the trip, right here beside the reserve seat?" My heart pounded against my ribs. It wasn't a question, it was an instruction. I looked at the reserve seat. The reflection of the child was a dark smudge now, and it seemed to be smiling. I knew this was my final stop. Mr. Henderson's instruction, right here beside the reserve seat, was not a request for my comfort. It was a sentence. I could feel the invisible passenger's gaze pressing down on me, a heavy, cold weight. I was the last student left on the bus, and the dread was a physical knot in my stomach. I walked down the aisle, every footstep echoing in the sudden, profound silence. When I reached the front, the bus driver, whose face was usually red and grumpy, looked pale and strangely detached, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He didn't acknowledge me again. I slid into the seat, positioning myself as far as possible from the cursed spot. The reserve seat was right beside me, terrifyingly close, with its cracked vinyl and the empty air that I knew was not empty at all. In the window reflection, the child was there, closer than ever, its small, shadowed face barely inches from my own. It wasn't smiling now. It was simply watching, waiting for me to brake. The bus picked up speed, bypassing my usual stop and turning onto the dark, forgotten roads that wound toward the edges of town. "What are you doing, Mr. Henderson? Where are we going?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He didn't respond. His hands were gripping the wheel, his knuckles white, but his eyes were vacant. It was as if he were just the mechanical extension of the bus, not its driver. Then, the true horror began. I felt a change in the air beside me, a sudden sharp drop in temperature that felt like stepping into an open freezer. A subtle, high-pitched whimpering started right next to my ear. "You have to stay," a tiny, reedy voice whispered, sounding like air escaping from a deflated balloon. "You were chosen." I jerked away, pressing myself against the far side of my seat. I couldn't see anything, but I could smell it now. A scent of damp cotton and something sickly sweet, like decaying flowers. I knew the child was leaning over the seat divider, its unseen face inches from mine. "No," I choked out, grabbing the nearest thing, a loose bolt on the metal frame of the seat. "I won't stay." I fumbled for my emergency exit, remembering the window escape tool near the driver's seat. But before I could move, I felt a terrifyingly cold, bony grip seize my wrist. The pain was immediate and searing, despite the hand being invisible. "You belong here now," the voice shrieked, no longer a whisper but a harsh, desperate cry. With a scream, I twisted my arm, ripping my wrist free of the invisible grasp. I didn't look back. I slammed my hand onto the emergency brake release near the driver's feet. The bus let out a colossal, ear-splitting screech as the tires locked up. The violent stop sent me flying forward, smashing hard against the dashboard before I collapsed onto the floor. The bus was silent. The engine was off. I scrambled up, ignoring the throbbing pain in my head. I didn't look at the driver or the reserve seat. I just slammed my hand onto the door release and dove out onto the asphalt. I crawled away, spitting out dust and gravel, until I was far enough to look back. The lights of Bus 11 were completely dark. It sat there, a massive, inert shape on the deserted side road. I pulled out my phone. This time I had a single bar of service. I frantically called 911. The police and emergency services arrived, but they found nothing supernatural. Mr. Henderson was sitting calmly in the driver's seat, claiming he was just pulling over for a rest when I suddenly jumped out the door. He had no memory of taking the detour. The subsequent investigation of the bus confirmed that the emergency brake had been engaged. The school district's mechanics found nothing wrong with the engine or steering. The police dismissed my story as a combination of panic and a minor head injury from the fall. I survived. I have scars on my wrist where the cold, unseen fingers held me, though the doctors say it's just road rash. But the ordeal changed everything. I never take the bus anymore. I walk 3 miles every morning and 3 miles every afternoon, avoiding the main street where the yellow behemoths roll past. Because even now, years later, every time a school bus passes me on the street, I catch myself looking at the windows. And I know with chilling certainty that I will never see the reserve seat as truly empty. I can still feel that unseen gaze, and in the reflective glass, I catch a fleeting glimpse of a small, patient shadow always looking at me, waiting for the day I might accidentally sit down for a ride. My town, Blackwood Creek, is the kind of place where nothing ever happens, except for the persistent, dreary drizzle that settles in every autumn. That, and the legend of Bus 90. Everyone in high school knew the story. A rickety old bus that supposedly crashed and burned decades ago, yet locals claimed it still appeared during the last bleak weeks of fall. They said you'd see it parked near the old quarry road or idling mysteriously at empty intersections late at night. It looked vacant, but if you stared long enough, you'd catch fleeting, shadowy glimpses of students sitting rigid behind the dusty windows. I'm Finn. Like any sensible 17-year-old, I considered Bus 90 a spooky bedtime story, until people started disappearing. It wasn't a loud, dramatic vanishing. It was slow and unsettling. It started with Lucas. He missed a test, then a week of classes. When I asked our history teacher, Ms. Dale, where he was, she frowned. "Lucas? I don't believe I've had a Lucas in this class, Finn." My stomach nodded. Lucas had sat right next to me for 2 years. He was loud, he loved bad jokes, and he was absolutely real. But when I asked my best friend Chloe about him later, she frowned. "Who are you talking about? Are you okay?" It was terrifying. Lucas's desk was gone, his name was not on the attendance roster, and his locker was cleared. It was as if the world had simply wiped him clean. Then came the rumors, whispered in the dim hallways. The night before Lucas vanished, a couple of seniors out driving saw an old yellow bus parked on the corner of Maple and 3rd, the one near the abandoned factory. They said its lights weren't quite right, too dim, too amber. I became obsessed. I started tracking the disappearances. 2 weeks after Lucas, a talented artist named Sierra stopped coming. This time I had her sketch pad. I looked at her portrait of me, proof she existed, while my friends vaguely recalled someone talented, but couldn't place a name or face. I began to realize the horror wasn't just that the students were gone. It was that the world forgot they were ever here. The bus wasn't taking passengers. It was erasing them. Late one Thursday, the rain had stopped, but a thick, unsettling fog had rolled in. I was walking home after staying late at the library, convinced I had to see this thing for myself. I stood near the town's oldest bus stop, shivering, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Then, I heard it, the deep grinding rumble of an engine that sounded far too old for our modern fleet. Out of the wall of swirling white fog, two impossibly dim circular headlights emerged. Slowly, silently, Bus 90 materialized. It was wider and heavier than any modern school bus, covered in dust and grime. It didn't stop at the curb. It simply idled in the middle of the street, a hulking yellow ghost waiting in the vapor. My heart hammered against my ribs. I instinctively reached for my phone, fingers shaking as I activated the camera. I lifted it and snapped a picture of the bus, a silent challenge to the legend. As the shutter clicked, the bus gave a low, chilling sigh of air brakes. For the briefest fraction of a second, I saw a dozen shadowy faces pressed against the fogged-up windows, unmoving, vacant-eyed. And then, with a lurch that made the metal groan, the bus sped away, swallowed instantly by the fog. I looked down at the photo on my screen. The picture was blurred, grainy, and almost entirely white. But there, cutting across the frame, was a distinct streaking shadow, the ghostly outline of an ancient yellow bus, rushing away into the night. The photograph was blurry, inconclusive proof. But I knew what I had seen. And as I started walking home, a frantic fear gripped me. Did anyone anywhere remember Sierra's last name? The bus was real, and it was hungry for oblivion. The blurry photo on my phone was cold comfort. It was a tangible thing, a sliver of proof that Bus 90 existed, but it couldn't stop the creeping oblivion. My mission became simple: to preserve the memories of those who were being erased. I started a secret log. For every student who vanished, I'd grab something, anything, that proved their reality. For Lucas, I had his ridiculous personalized pencil with his name carved into it. For Sierra, I kept a copy of her haunting self-portrait. I hid them all in a locked box under my floorboards, my private museum of the forgotten. The most terrifying thing was watching the erasure happen in real time. I focused on Chloe, my best friend. She'd been close with Sierra. One afternoon, I held up Sierra's portrait. "Remember this?" I asked, my voice tight. Chloe stared at the drawing, a furrow in her brow. "It's really good, Finn. Who drew it?" She looked genuinely confused, a fleeting shadow of a memory crossing her eyes before being yanked away. "Wait, was there a girl who drew a lot?" "Sierra," I insisted. "She sat by the window in chemistry." Chloe shook her head, a blank look settling in. "Sorry, no. You must be thinking of someone else." That was the moment the scale of the horror truly hit me. The bus wasn't just killing people, it was annihilating their history. My search for answers became frantic. I spent hours in the library archives researching the old quarry bus accident. I found a microfilm report about a 1970s incident involving a school bus, Bus 90, carrying a group of students on a field trip. But the passenger count was vague, the names listed were oddly generic, and the accident was filed under unresolved. It was like the official record itself was trying to forget. Then, the focus shifted to me. It was a cold, bright afternoon. I was in the main office handing in a late slip when I happened to glance at the newly printed attendance sheet on the counter. I wasn't trying to look, but my eyes snagged on the list of students in my homeroom. My name, Finn, was listed, but right next to it, where my birth date should have been, the ink was faint and blurry, as if the printer cartridge had run dry, or as if that specific piece of information was struggling to remain on the page. My blood ran cold. The erasing mechanism was already targeting me. That night, I didn't wait for the legend to appear. I went straight to the corner of Maple and 3rd, the place where the seniors had seen it. The air was heavy, the fog thicker than before. I didn't see the bus, but I felt it. The cold wasn't just the autumn air. It was a deeper, chilling presence, like standing next to an open grave. I backed against a telephone pole, scanning the desolate intersection. Suddenly, from a side street I hadn't noticed, 2 ghostly amber headlights swung into view. Bus 90 was back. This time it wasn't idling. It was slowly driving toward me. As it drew closer, the windows, usually opaque with dust, seemed to clear slightly, and I saw them clearly. The shadowy students. Their clothes were out of date, their faces pale, and their eyes were fixed on me with a dreadful, ancient hunger. Then, one of the shadow students, a boy in the 3rd row, slowly raised a hand and pointed. My breath hitched. I knew what that meant. I was the next name on their register. I didn't need any more proof. I was no longer an observer. I was the passenger they were coming to collect, and if they succeeded, no one in Blackwood Creek would even remember to mourn me. My fight for memory had become a fight for my own existence. I had to run, but my legs felt rooted to the cold, damp concrete. The sheer focus of that pointing hand, that collective, hungry gaze from the shadowy children, snapped me out of my fear-induced paralysis. I didn't wait for the bus to reach the curb. I spun around and ran, fueled by the terrifying certainty that if I were caught, my life wouldn't just end, it would be unlived. I sprinted down a narrow side street, dodging recycling bins and tripping over tree roots. Behind me, I heard the impossible sound of the ancient bus accelerating. It wasn't the slow, heavy roar of a school bus. It was a hungry, grinding rush that seemed to defy its size and age. I risked a glance back. Through the gaps between the houses, I saw the beam of those dim amber headlights cutting through the fog, closer than they should have been. The bus was gaining on me. Desperate, I veered into a narrow alleyway between a hardware store and a closed laundromat. I knew the bus couldn't follow, but that didn't stop the panic. I jammed myself behind a dumpster, crouching low and pressing my hands over my mouth to silence my ragged breathing. The sound of the engine didn't pass. It stopped. I heard a terrifying pneumatic hiss, the sound of air brakes releasing, and then silence. A silence that was heavier and colder than the night air. Slowly, cautiously, I edged my head out from behind the dumpster. Bus 90 was parked at the mouth of the alley. It hadn't come down the narrow path, but it was waiting. The front door, usually sealed, was standing wide open, revealing an oppressive blackness inside that seemed to absorb the minimal light of the street lamp. Then, from the darkness, a sound drifted out. It was a rhythmic, almost metallic clack, 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 like the bus driver flipping through the pages of an old attendance register. I knew what was happening. The bus wasn't chasing me anymore. It was calling my name. I had to do something. My only weapon was my presence, my living reality. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Lucas's personalized pencil. I lunged out from the alley, not toward the bus, but toward the telephone pole right beside it. I scraped the pencil lead against the rough wood, frantically writing my name, FINN, in thick black letters, right where the bus could see it. A declaration of existence. As the last N was finished, a sudden, powerful blast of frigid wind slammed against me, staggering me backwards. It felt like an invisible force had rushed out of the bus door. I tumbled back into the alley. When I looked up, the bus was gone. No rumble, no grinding engine, no roar. Just the empty, fog-choked street where it had been moments before. I lay there for a long time, the shock keeping me pinned. When the police finally found me, a hysterical, injured teenager huddled behind a dumpster, I was covered in bruises and scrapes. They attributed my wild story to trauma. My claims about the disappearing students? They politely checked the register and the records. Lucas, Sierra, they confirmed those names weren't enrolled in the high school. I know the truth because I still have the pencil, and I still have my memory, but even I can feel the edges fraying. Sometimes, when I think of Lucas's joke or Sierra's laugh, there's a moment of blankness, a cold space where the memory used to be, quickly replaced by fear. My existence was spared, but the battle is not over. I check the attendance sheet every day now, and my heart leaps when I see the clean, dark ink of my name. But I know that somewhere in Blackwood Creek, out on the lonely, foggy roads during the late weeks of autumn, Bus 90 is still running its route. And I live every day with the terrifying, absolute certainty that it only spared me this time. It will be back. And one day, I know that low, grinding rumble will stop right outside my door, and the metallic sound of the register will begin again, waiting to call my name.